My dudes, as many of you know, I started a podcast. That's right. It's on Spotify, it's on Apple, it's on all the places where podcasts are. But here on YouTube specifically, to make it a little bit more interesting and not just talking heads or just audio with a still frame, I decided to include artwork throughout the whole audio conversation that I had. And I'm going to start doing that for these videos here on YouTube. So if you don't like the conversation, it's cool. You can just watch the artwork. I know many people prefer to just watch cool artwork unfold. Usually it's artwork related to Twilight Monk. In this case, I'm drawing the image that was used in the podcast plates, as we call them, the thumbnails and whatnot. And next week, I'll have some more interesting, different artwork, as well as about an hour conversation. This week, I got to sit down with Andres Prince, who is the community manager and social media manager for Gravity Game Arise. And we talk a little bit more about that, as well as we talk about, so it's a little bit about marketing games, and then it's also a lot about where the ideas for Twilight Monk came from, and how the novels tie into the game and how I construct a script for a video game. So this might be very interesting to you if you're a game developer or you're an artist that's looking to make your IPs into a game, or you're just looking to, maybe you just appreciate the creative process. There's a lot about my creative process in this particular video. All right, so let's dig into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Twilight Monk Podcast. I suppose this would be roughly episode 3. Today I have with me Prince. Well, I call you Prince. Is your full name Prince or Andres? I get in your emails. What do you go by, Prince?
My last name is Prince, but since I'm living in Japan, they go by last names, so it kind of became my nickname / official name that I go by. But my first name is Andres.
Andres. It's so unique because it's a Latin name, right?
Right.
You're not, to establish this is an audio podcast. You're not Japanese, correct?
No, I'm American. My dad is he's Caribbean American, and my mom, she's Spanish. So, but I was raised in United States in Rhode Island, and I just became very fascinated by Japanese culture, especially the gaming industry, and now I'm moved over here and I'm working at an indie game company that's publishing Twilight Monk.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we're here to talk about is Twilight Monk.
Yeah.
What a lot of people might not realize is that when you're really running what's called X, but the Twitter page, you're running a lot of that. So you clip together, you're a hardworking man, because you put together a lot of little clips of gameplay, and you do a lot of market research to how's the best way to present the game, and there's so much behind the scenes of, marketing. Everybody who's making indie games and everyone who's tried to get attraction on their YouTube or on their Twitter channels knows it's difficult. That's a full-time job. So could you talk a little bit about everything that you do?
Yeah, so mostly what I do is running social media and engaging with the communities that are interested in Twilight Monk. So, a lot of people think that I'm Trent, actually.
Yeah.
They think that I'm you.
Yeah.
But I'm mostly being representative of your team.
You do a good impersonation, actually. You got to start out your text saying, "My dudes." Yeah.
I need to work on my Trent impression. I'm not trying to ever pretend to be you by any means. I'm just trying to represent, being a member of your team as much as possible. So mostly what I'm doing is I'm playing the game, first of all, over and over and over again, and getting a feel, of course, first and foremost, what people love about the series. And then, kind of going from there and engaging with communities on Reddit, on Twitter. Those are our main 2 ventures, but we're trying to expand, and we're actually trying to make a fandom page, a wiki for Twilight Monk. So that's going to be our next territory that we're going to expand into. But also, we can get the people who are interested in the world of Twilight Monk together and really allow them to have a space to, freely talk with us about it. It's the thing that I think is so wonderful about indie games is you get to interact directly with the developers and the publishers. It feels personal. It's like influencers almost. The same reason people like YouTubers is that they feel like they are a part of the game. So, to branch into what today's topic is, we're going to be talking about the story and the world of Twilight Monk, which is something I am constantly engaging with, which I think is one of the number one reasons that people are really drawn to the game is, of course the artwork, but also the fact that the artwork evokes this very large world. And the reason it does that is because it is a really large world. And I know that from reading your concept art books, from reading some of the Twilight Monk books, but like listening to you talk in your YouTube videos. But of course, a lot of this information is in a lot of different places. I think from now on, we definitely want to do things like the fandom page, like the Wikipedia, and have all of this information consolidated. So today I really want to talk with you for the sake of, getting people who are just learning about Twilight Monk for the first time, people who don't even know about you. They might just know about the game, and they're coming into this, they want to know about what's this world. That's what I really wanted to dive into today.
I've never done a podcast or anything like this before. I mostly just do YouTube art tutorials and a little bit of like art journaling on YouTube, and art, teaching art and whatnot on YouTube, and teaching game development there. So all this is a little bit really kind of new and fresh for me too. So I appreciate that sometimes you'll be like, hey, people have been asking about this thing. Could you talk about that in the next video, or things like that? So you've been really helpful in like steering a little bit of what I'm learning people want to know about Twilight Monk. It certainly has been around for a long time. But yes, so I'm going to, in a sense, you gave me a sort of a pre-written list of questions of things that you wanted to talk about. So did you want to dive right into that?
Yeah, for sure. Let's start.
Let's do it.
Okay, so today's topic, of course, like we said, is introducing the world of Twilight Monk. And so the first thing that I wanted to touch on was can you paint a picture of the world of the game Twilight Monk? Like, what is the story that we are walking into? You write these illustrated novels. Twilight Monk is a long-running illustrated novel series. It's not just the game.
Yeah.
A lot of people coming in might think that it's just the game, but I am curious, can you illustrate for me what this world that we're stepping into the game as if it's a portion of the illustrated novels?
Right. Okay. So I had started maybe about, 8 years ago. I decided that, well, obviously I wanted to make video games out of the Twilight Monk IP. I'd been working at Blizzard and Riot and a few other popular video game studios, but I wanted to create, I had been wanting to create this kind of kung fu fantasy mythical adventure game series for a long time. And Twilight Monk isn't just like one story. And it really is sort of kind of like, have you ever seen, there was a TV show in the 90s that was like the Hercules, the Legendary Journeys. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I actually haven't.
Xena, Warrior Princess. Have you ever heard of these shows?
It sounds familiar. I've definitely seen the like vintage box art of these where there's like a guy really muscular, like on the front, there's like a woman collapsed at his feet, something like that, right?
Yes, there was always a little bit of that classic 80s kind of fantasy tropes, But the concept of these sort of serialized adventure stories was that you'd have this main character that would go from town to town, and every one of these towns that they'd go to would be like some, corrupt merchant was like selling poison, but he was also on the side, or he was poisoning people, but then selling the cure, or things like that. And these were, then the character would resolve the conflict in that town and then move on to the next town. And it was a lot of social commentary, but it was very subtle, but the character would get to fight cool monsters and make allies that would kind of show up later, or a nemesis, and I suppose, another series that did it really well was One Piece does this really well. You go to an island, there's a sort of a big conflict going on. Maybe you recruit somebody into your party, and then, there's character development. Maybe you go back to one of those characters' hometowns, much like an old, 90s or 80s JRPG. And there was a big, long adventure that kind of culminated in the ultimate RPG finale, kind of a thing would happen. And so I was building up based on that kind of structure. And I had always loved drawing martial arts characters. I grew up on like Street Fighter 2. And so like I draw these kung fu dudes, and like what would be a cool fighter and unique fighting style and things like that. And so, and I also loved drawing dragons and things like that throughout all these years. But Twilight Monk at its core is this serialized, ongoing kung fu fantasy adventure where you play as a monk that's going to be fighting mythical creatures and demons and building alliances and having mysterious like hunters try to track him down. And, they have their own reasons for hating him. And you find out a little bit more about that in the game And the game itself, a lot of people might not realize, is actually a sequel to. So there were actually 4 novels, or I guess I would say they're novellas. Each one's about 50,000 words, which is about the size of half of a size of a novel. And I did illustrations throughout the whole thing. So there were about 75 illustrations per book. 2 of the 4 books were sort of a prequel, and they tell the story of Mao Din Tenza, which when the main character of the game was a little boy, he fell from the stars, and he was adopted into this old farmer. And he goes on this big journey to get to the Crescent Isle, which is where the monastery, where all the Moonkin go to train, because they're dangerous creatures in this universe. And they're very feared everywhere they go. And in fact, many Moonkin, when they land from the heavens, they're just killed immediately because, well, we find out why in the novels. But essentially, once they get to the monastery, they sort of change their name. They take on a new identity. Mao Din becomes Raziel, and he is terrible at Kung Fu because he got there late. Everybody else got there early. He got there late. The Twilight Monk illustrated novels begin with Secrets of Kung Fulio, which is right where I was just talking about, where he's been at the monastery for a little while. He makes new alliances with Rin. He makes new alliances with Nora. You know, they go. He develops his skills, and you really see him develop his skills and develop his personality throughout this story. But the difference between writing a book and writing a game, very distinctly different. There's so much about the character's internal struggle going on in the books. When you get to an action platformer RPG, you can't really go that deep into it. Otherwise, people go, well, you got Kojima level, 3-hour cutscenes here, and we don't want to do that. I wanted to keep it very focused on the action, So the sequel to Secrets of Kung Fulio is Return of the Ancients, and that's where you really find out who Nox is. Well, you see Nox in both of these books. It's sort of a continuation, and it really sets things up for who these characters are, why they don't get along, and what their place as Moonkin, what their place is in the world, and this looming threat that's sort of building and mounting just outside of the monastery walls. And that's really kind of where we leave off in the very beginning of the game. But I chose to start the game immediately after the books because the events of the books are, well, it's not as fun to play as a character who's not good at fighting.
Right. He's developed. He's at his peak. He's kind of experienced all the things that he's had in the previous books.
Well, he's starting his adventure as a warrior. Basically, by the end of Return of the Ancients, without giving spoilers, I'll just say, well, I mean, the title says it's the Return of the Ancients. So we find out what his destiny is in the second book, and then basically he's living that destiny in the game, which is what it's sort of like, if you were playing a Castlevania game, it's interesting how Simon Belmont became a vampire hunter, but that's a great side story novel. The game itself, I don't need to see him kind of clumsily learning how to use the whip, or whatever. So in short, yes, the books act as really valuable, extra supplementary material, but not necessarily required for you to enjoy the games.
And I think that's it's also just perfect timing in terms of the fact, up until this point, you've been writing the books, and the last book that you're leaving off of, Raz is really starting a new journey with a new level of strength, and you are also, it's coinciding with you now, finally switching over from, the manga and written novels to gaming, which is, you've always been working on these gaming teams, but now you're finally making your own game. So it's almost like, do you feel like there's a bit of a personal connection between, the things that happen in the book and the things that are happening in your own life?
Yeah, I don't know any other way to write. Everything in everything in my stories is sort of allegorical or representative of things that are happening in my real life. People might not realize, for example, if you read Escape from Giant's Crown, which was one of the prequel novels, that is literally very similar to a place that I worked in my past, where people are really kind of climbing over each other to get ahead. And it's a little bit of my social commentary just on what I experienced, and being in that kind of an environment. And that's again, kind of going back to that serialized adventure. They go to a new town. There's this big problem there, and those big problems are related to things that, I guess you'd say things that I experienced in my own life. And so, not that I have the most adventurous life, it's always very symbolic, Yeah.
Something that I'm also interested to discuss about is I've always been interested in gaming, and I'm actually an artist myself. I do a lot of illustrative work, and I've always thought, it'd be so cool to make a game, but I've always been concerned, if you make a game, then there's a lot of clash between, the programming and sort of like very logical aspect of developing a game, and then the very artistic, free side of, all these ideas running through your head, especially with stories and stuff. How do you kind of resolve those two very different worlds? Like how have you felt that it is? Because I think when you're writing a book, it's much more free and you're much more flexible, but with a game, it's much more restrictive. So how do you feel that you've been able to resolve the difference between those two worlds?
Yeah, well, you hit on something that's kind of one of the biggest challenges of my life and my creative process too, because you're absolutely right. Like being a producer, keeping a project on track, being able to communicate well with your team on what's needed and being understanding as to, their challenges and struggles, as well as the technical aspect of programming. I actually did learn to program myself to make my first game, Aikida. When you're doing milestones, it's very strict about this asset needs to be in, then that asset needs to be in, and everything kind of needs to work like clockwork, and there's a very precise sort of structure to it. And that too much of that thinking just doesn't allow you to be in a free flow state. So it's been very challenging, I will say that. But one of the best things about working with a team is that you can hire people who are better than you at that particular thing. So for example, once we switched to Unreal Engine on Twilight Monk in the last, I'd say 2.5 years ago, I haven't really done much coding at all. I understand like how to create state machines. I understand how to like structure a idea for a creature's behavior in a way that a programmer can implement it. And part of that is also because we just communicate really well. But it's also, it helps that, even the programmers and even the game designer on the project is also an artist. So they understand me a little bit more too. And I think they would probably, like Matt, for example, he's by trade more of an artist, but he fell into being more of a programmer. And definitely, I'm sure he would have a lot to say about this topic as well. It's a dance for sure, and sometimes it's a violent and hostile dance that you don't know who's going to survive which part of your brain, whether the creative side will die or the technical side will die. But I tend to always fall back on remembering the player, and that always wins. There were times when I was younger, I was more just art focused, like when I was working at Blizzard, for example, and I fought on so many hills that were purely artistic. Oftentimes the artist in me wants to go just bonkers. I just want to see it for the sake of seeing this set piece or this character or something. There's technical restrictions. I try to not think about those when I'm just conceptualizing or writing it into the script. Sometimes you just got to go, screw it. Like, let's just aim for the stars. And then you get to the technical side and the programmers will push back. Oh, that's going to take 3 weeks to implement. So that gets squashed down. Or in general, I found just to switch into the creative brain and be unrestricted, and then let the constricting part, the producer, when you put your producer hat on, you have to separate emotionally from your ideas, and you have to kind of take the chopping block to it and cut out the things that you can't do. But even that's a more preferable process than starting with something that is small and fits within the constraints, but it's not exciting or interesting. Because no way am I going to want to ship a game that I'm not excited about or isn't exciting, but you do have constraints. You do have to fit things within the bandwidth to implement that thing, because games could take 20 years to do if you don't have some restrictions. So those constraints are good. You just have to be creative within those constraints. But very fortunately, game development is somewhat segmented, especially if you're on a schedule. In the beginning of development, tons of creativity are absolutely necessary. The middle of development is just frickin' survival. It's just making sure that your deadlines are getting met, and that most of your creative ideas that had no boundaries can be fit in sort of like stuffed into the box that you've got, And then the final portion of development is just shipping the game, like shipping the game with as close to the original vision as possible, and making sure that the compromises you've made aren't compromising the most exciting parts. but you still like, you've got to make sure that all the bugs are cleaned up. And that's a different mindset, different brain than all the other parts of development too. And it is constricting, and then it takes a little bit of work to get back to the creative state of thinking about the next thing, the next new exciting expansion or sequel or whatever it might be.
That's really interesting to think about. Yeah, it's very different, unique at each phase of development. I didn't really consider that, but the really beginning portion, you are much more flexible to allow this kind of artistic self to thrive, and then the rest of the portions of development kind of get bogged down and then refining, and you have to listen to a lot of people as you refine the game and make it, your vision. But I guess in terms of the story and the characters and the world, like, how is it balancing, your vision with the things that people are commenting on the game? Like, do you ever feel like, you kind of have to be a little bit selfish sometimes in the decisions you make because this is the vision and this is the world?
I'm entirely selfish. I'm not going to deny that. If I wanted to just make games for other people, I'd go and work at one of those other studios again. I opted to do this because, to me, it is a selfish endeavor. However, that said, the greatest joy in game development, and you'll hear any indie game developer that's shipped a game will probably tell you the same thing. The greatest joy is watching somebody figure out your game without you telling them anything. You're just watching them play and figure it out, and they're going through the world. And like, my greatest joy is when I see people go, oh, that's that statue from the novels, or oh, this is the dojo, or this is that character that did this, and let me tell you a little bit about because I read the books, or like people who really experience your game without you really telling them anything about it, and when they're solving problems in the design and they're lost in this world you've created, that is to me the single most rewarding part of game development. You kind of lose a little bit of that when you're working on big, huge teams with many developers, and your responsibilities are sort of like focused on just one little part. But when you're plotting out the script and you're, like when I get a chuckle from a player on a stream, like that's so rewarding for me, So it's not, when I say it's selfish, I mean, that's the satisfaction I get, but it is also the selfish part of me is when I can entertain. Yeah. Like I suppose that's the core of it.
Great. I mean, I think as far as other things that I was curious to ask about, this pretty much covers all of the bases. I'm definitely gonna have to be picking your brain a little bit more in the upcoming days as I'm putting together the fandom page, which I think that a lot of people who are listening and a lot of your fans can look forward to, because anything that you ever mention, like you mentioned Giant's Crown, that is going to be something that we're going to put together in a state. So, if you haven't read the books, then you can at least go to the wiki and you can click on, the different sections and discover more about the world. So
there are other solutions as well. For example, I did a audio reading on Audible, so you can pick up Secrets of Kung Fu Leo on audio.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I'm just in sort of the final stages of recording Return of the Ancients. I wanted to get that out before the game's release, which is awesome. Very soon. I can't say more, but it's March. We've announced that the game is coming out in March. So yeah. Yes. Which is right around the corner, really. So we're really just putting a bow on everything. But yeah, like getting together any materials, for example, people could read those books. They're available on Amazon. There's also a huge art book that I think a lot of people might not realize. There were a couple of people on Twitter that were like, well, wait a minute, can I unlock all of the artwork in the game? And yes, there's an art gallery that you can unlock in the game. But I think people should know these illustrated novels, like I spent years working on them, and there's tons of artwork in there. I literally could not fit all of the artwork into the game as an unlockable, as much as I would love to. It's sort of like, it's meant to be supplementary material, and it's meant to be a world you can get lost in. But each of the books is sort of short enough that you could sit down and, 1 day or 2 days to read, with a casual reading session.
And even if you don't have time to read, like I've found that just looking through the illustrated novels, there's a lot of illustration in these. So even just
Hmm.
picking them up and just leafing through them, you can just look at the pictures
Yeah.
and read a few sentences that are related to that image and get a feel for the
Yeah.
world and the history and what's going on. It's very interesting, I think.
Yeah, it was. So it was inspired by. There was a series of novels called the Spiderwick Chronicles,
I
and
loved those books so
really,
much. Yes, I used to read those and I loved the books that were like the bestiaries and they would have like little I think it was the Spiderwick they would have like all this like ecology like notes about all the creatures like you could tell that the world was really thoughtfully created. That's actually so interesting that Twilight Monk that you were inspired by those
yeah.
books because I can see the similarity.
So yeah, I was in Portland, and there's a major bookstore there, a very famous bookstore there, and I went in there. It's like a museum, and I just happened to find these books, and then I was talking to a buddy of mine who used to work with the artist Tony Dieterlisi, and I was just so excited to be writing the Twilight Monk books, and I was telling him my buddy about it, and he's like, "Oh, I know Tony. Do you want me to introduce you?" So I got to interview Tony Dieterlisi on my YouTube channel,
Oh, that's so
the
cool.
author of the Spiderwick Chronicles. Yeah. So yeah, heavily inspired by Spiderwick Chronicles, and I also really liked the way that How to Train Your Dragon had all these illustrations throughout the
Yeah,
books.
absolutely.
And I always thought, you know what, there are not enough drawings. So I wanted to. My personal challenge was I want to put more artwork in the Twilight Monk books than Tony Dieterlisi puts in his Spiderwick books. But yeah, it's a tall order, man. It's really tough to do, especially while you're working on video games. So those were some really busy years for me, just writing those books, and I was very insecure about my writing in the beginning. So I rewrote the first book 3 times, and
Wow.
and then the second book I rewrote twice, and then the third book, Secrets of Kung Fulio and Return of the Ancients, I worked with a co-writer on, Chris Krubeck. I think he's done a couple of things in video games, but mostly he was getting sort of trapped into not doing fiction, and he had a great passion for fiction, and he's just really good at it. So he and I had weekly meetings for 2 years to write those books. At the time I was running an art house, we were doing tons of artwork for Blizzard and Riot and Sony and various other companies and Fortnite and whatnot. And so I got to get some of the artists that I'd been working with on that to help contribute to some of the artwork in Return of the Ancients and Secrets of Kung Fulio.
Oh, so because I was under the impression that all of the artwork was just created by you directly, but it was your team was helping produce the illustrations as well.
Believe me, it's like running an art house and writing novels and teaching yourself to program. It was a busy couple of years for me. And also, one of the things that I learned around that period of time is if you can hire somebody that's better than you at the thing, then absolutely do it. And one of the things that I love about working with artists is, believe me, it has its challenges too. But one of the things I love about working with artists is I get to see everybody's different take on everything. And don't get me wrong, there's not a single drawing in there that I didn't touch.
Right, right.
But for instance, Danny Kong, who I've worked with for over 10 years or 11 years with Aquatic Moon, on various games, he was helping me out with just doing some storyboards and sketching out ideas. And so I would give him, oh, this is the scene, this is the script. And then he'd get me like, yeah, here's a little thumbnail of like a cool pose for this character in this scene. And we try to encapsulate the action from the events of the story. But the downside of that is, yeah, there's if I weren't able to touch everything up, it would be a lot of inconsistencies because every artist kind of draws things a little bit at their own way. But
Right.
yeah, I absolutely love that. I love, it's so, there's something about writing books that's very romantic, I guess you'd
Hmm.
say. Like you're creating this world, you're giving the viewer emotion, you're putting them in a place. And if you can really capture them and put them in that location, and you give them a cool visual to go with that, it really is like directing movies without having to have a huge film crew and budgets and worrying about your actors getting the best performance out of your actors. Like I would, while I was writing these books, I'd be saying the lines between characters and having the conversations between characters. And even when characters are arguing, it's like that was one of my favorite things to write, is characters with different views arguing about something, And I really miss it, honestly. I do. And making this game gave me a chance to get very concise with things. But a part of me really wants to just do novelization versions of all the events in the game. The game embodies what was going to be the next 5 or 6 novels.
Oh, that many novels. It's not just one.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh no, I have it all planned out. In fact, I have about 10 more novels planned out after the events of the game. So
oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
It's like not many series that you can think of where it's like, oh, after you finish the first 2 or 3 novels, then you have to play the game, and then you can read the next novels. Like, there's not many series that can say that.
Yeah. Well,
That's kind of interesting.
What would be amazing is but it would be a lot of work. But what would be amazing is if while you're playing the game, you could be, for instance, the game, how the game starts out, and you go into the catacombs. This is not spoilers because this all happens in the first 20 minutes, 30 minutes of the game. But there's an event that happens in the back of Crescent Isle on the dojo path, and then you go down in that whole first chapter of events where you're trying to get that particular item that opens the passage to the north. And you know what I'm talking about if you played it.
Yeah.
All that is that's part of the first story, everything leading up to the Frozen Mountain region. And I'm trying to be as spoiler free as I can, but everything, like the Frozen Mountain, is its own novel, and I have probably half of it written. It's just not really refined. And so I always thought it would be really amazing if you could read through the novelization of a game and you see how everything's sort of truncated for the game to move you along. Because when people are playing a game, they want cool monsters, they want cool combos. It's mostly about the feel of the game. It's about how it feels to embody that character and the abilities that you unlock and the kind of monsters you're fighting and the skill that you're developing. And sure, I try to give people a little bit of a spectacle with the art, especially by making it kind of 2.5D. It's not just a 2D world. It really is you're living in this hand-drawn reality that you can carry in your freaking pocket on a Nintendo Switch, by the way, which is the coolest thing I feel like I've ever participated in. This game is the coolest thing I've ever participated in. And it really could not be possible without the help of Gravity Game Arise. And you guys have really put a lot of trust and faith in me and my team. And can we just talk a little bit about Gravity Game Arise? And I mean, you guys are publishing a couple of different games right now, right?
Yeah. We focus on indie titles mostly, but we also have developed 2 titles, and we're also, what's the word? We're running a few smartphone games. So we're doing quite a lot of different things. But yeah, I'm part of the indie division, so I focus on just indie. Well, we're indie and retro, so we focus on publishing indie games and also publishing retro games, which are being, re-released through Gravity. It's a bit of a confusing, but there's a lot of overlap between Gravity and Gravity Game Arise. Like Gravity will have games that they make indie publishing contracts with, and then Gravity Game Arise will mostly help with the marketing in Japan. So we're a Japanese-based company. Gravity's in Korea, so we usually help with anything that needs to be done relating to the marketing in Japan for whatever indie or smaller titles that they have, but never they're like Ragnarok titles. We don't touch those.
Right. Yeah, that's Korea, right?
Yeah.
So you say that you're also publishing or remastering or re-releasing some retro titles. Have those been announced yet?
Yes. So Snow Brothers 2 is coming. It's they have a special limited physical version that they're releasing in East Asia. That's really cool. And I don't know if you're familiar with Snow Brothers 2. I think it was big in Japan. It was an old school arcade game, and if you look at the old school, videos of it, it's very interesting. It's very humorous. It's weird, gang of snowman and a weird Oni. It has lots of Japanese references that are really only understood in Japan. But it's very, very, very funny to play.
It's got like a mystical ninja vibe. It looks like.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that.
Yeah, I love the mystical ninja games, man. Those are so fun. I wish they'd bring more of them. Could you guys get the rights to do those? I would love to work on those. I'll help you release them.
That would. I think it's Konami. I'd also be on board for them.
Yeah, I think that's Konami. But I know there would be a lot of people that would just buy a huge collection of Goemon, Legend of the Mystical Ninja, all the N64 and the SNES versions, and
those retro games have something really special about them. We remaster them into, with better graphics, but the gameplay remains the same. And I think that there's something still really charming even today of just like playing those, especially playing it 2-player. In Snow Brothers, you could play 4-player, like those types of multiplayer, just like very simple games that you could play at an arcade for like 10 or 20 minutes. Like having them on your console and on the Switch is really nice.
Yeah, no, I love retro games, and in a lot of ways, one of the reasons I got out of working in AAA is because I love the way games have always been most of my life. I don't get me wrong, I still play some modern games, but for example, right now I'm playing Dragon Quest, the 2.5D remaster. Have you played this?
I haven't played it. I've only played which one? The one that they remastered for the Switch. I think it was 11 or 13.
Well, 11 was... Oh, yeah, you're talking about the definitive Echoes of an Elysian Age.
I think so.
The name is different in Japan, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm just like, that sounds completely like not what I played. But I think, yeah, you're right. The titles are different in Japan.
Yeah, 11 there was a definitive edition release, but it wasn't very retro. Like, that was Dragon Quest... Well, I mean, it's turn-based. Don't get me wrong. Dragon Quest XI was a great game, but what they did with Dragon Quest III Remake is just such an incredible sort of... It feels like the old stuff, but it really is... I don't know if you can look it up while we're chatting, but they've really done this beautiful combination of 2D and 3D. And if you look at Twilight Monk, you can see where we were kind of doing something similar, but they went straight up their characters are pixel art.
Oh, I see. That's super cool. Yeah, well, they probably were seeing the success of games like whatever it's called, Octopath Traveler.
Oh my God,
and
yeah,
stuff like that.
Beautiful game.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of these, like I think for the longest time, the game industry has been moving towards, really realistic graphics, really like real, and then now we've kind of reached the pinnacle of realistic graphics, and people, it's not even. They're realizing it's not even as enjoyable as they thought it would be, and there's still so much charm and so much wonderful aspects in the original version that was its own art form, and I think is what people are coming to appreciate, is that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like these things that were present in the original are what made it charming. The fact that it was top-down view, the fact that the characters were pixelated. These things shouldn't be sacrificed just because it needs to be quote unquote updated.
And there's certainly a charm in the way that games were always made before, and I think part of that is also because the development teams were very small. So when somebody went into work on Snow Bros 2, they were probably like one of two artists, if that. Do you know what I mean? Right. So that artist's personality comes through in the artwork.
Right.
Whereas if you're artist number 256 on the newest Assassin's Creed game. And don't get me wrong, I've enjoyed a couple of the last Assassin's Creed games. But I don't feel the sort of artistic personality of the individual at play there, And
right.
All of this, everything we're talking about right now, like, Twilight Monk is heavily inspired by Castlevania. It's heavily inspired by, like, Legend of Zelda 2. These classic games. In many ways, I played a lot of the Castlevania Advance collection from Konami that came out while we were in the midst of developing this game. And in many ways, I was looking at all the things that they did, and I was like, well, what do I love about this, and what do I not like about it? And by no means would I criticize them, but I do think there are some things where I'm like, well, with Twilight Monk, we want to capture that feel of what you had with some of these classic RPG platformers, specifically the Symphony of the Night and the Game Boy Advance Castlevanias, because they were like Metroidvanias, but they were also RPGs. I wanted to capture that feel, but also simultaneously bring in modern controls, bring in some of the more modern kind of like speed of movement, things like that. And I think that there's a marriage there that's perfect. And that's why I'm so proud of what we made with Twilight Monk. I feel like it embodies everything that we were just talking about, that the love of everything classic, and met with the modern senses. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say, in terms of the like storytelling techniques that you use in Twilight Monk, like what games do you feel like you referenced in terms of, because it's very different, right? When you're writing a book and you're telling your story, you can tell your story however you like, and you're probably referencing other books in that case. But when it comes to a game, the storytelling method is not the same, so you have to look at a different kind of reference material. I'm curious, what you used as a structure for creating the storytelling in the world of Twilight Monk.
It's a great question, because it was a shift in my mind I had to do. While writing the script for the game, I became very aware very quickly that I didn't want to sift through tons and tons of dialogue, and I didn't want players to have to sift through tons and tons of dialogue. Like, get to the fun stuff. I hate when an RPG gives you 30 minutes of reading before you've decided whether you're invested in the characters or the story, So writing a game like this, where you don't have voice acting, it should be a little bit more concise. It should be like quicker to the point, so to speak. I hate to use this reference because people might get the wrong impression, but Dark Souls does a great job of creating a world that is full of lore and has a lot of like rich world building to dig into, while simultaneously not pulling you away from gameplay to sort of give you this half an hour exposition, or the story is there to set the tone and to very quickly establish, these guys are good guys, these guys are bad guys, these guys have a history, these guys just met. Firstly, what I'll do is I start with a paragraph that summarizes the whole book. That's your elevator pitch. Then I write out bullet points of events that take place throughout, and then I figure out, where's there a little bit of flexibility? Where could I have a side story going on, or a B or C storyline happening? Where's there room for that wiggle room between, this in the second act, so to speak. And then I start to go in and I'll and that's the same structure as writing a novel or writing a game. And then I start to go in and I'll write out, while I'm in the shower, I'll write out an argument between characters, and then I go back to my computer and like type it out. Okay. And what I came to realize with this story, we originally had only planned, well, I'll just say it, we had originally only planned 5 acts. And that was what was like in our contract and our schedule and our budget and all that stuff. But the game really needed this, and I'm going to be vague without spoilers here. There's a thing that happens in every Metroidvania where you get to go through the whole world, but you're super powered up. You have all these abilities. You're just kind of collecting those last little things that you remember. There was that dungeon that had that blocked path that I was supposed to remember to come back to once I got that other ability, And so there's this final chapter that was added, but all the new dialogue needed to be added because there's towns you visit. So now characters are going to change what they say depending on how much you've progressed through the main story. And so all of that needs to get filled in. And, I will brag about my team forever and ever. I'm so lucky to work with the people I get to work with because, for example, Anthony, he's half of the team is in the UK, half of the team is in the US, and then we're working with a Japanese publisher. So we're all 24 hours a day. This game is being worked on, and Anthony would sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of, or in the morning, and he would have written out an NPC's interaction because he just needed the character to know, this is where you need to go next, or here's a little hint to like a hidden secret that I've planted on a little island somewhere that the player can find, and yet he has a sort of an innate sort of charm in his writing style as well, and he kind of gets the tone of the game because it's very, very light and inspired by it. Like I don't like when games get so serious. I actually this is why I was talking about the Legend of the Mystical Ninja and the Goemon games. They're so fun. This from right out of the gate, it's like, yeah, the character can say something goofy or dorky. It's fine. Like as long as the player feels that they're on a fun globetrotting adventure, and the character is not going to be dealing with like too heavy of issues. There's a threat to the world, but it's not. There's not blood, guts, and the demons' souls have risen from the ashes of the. No, there's moments that it kind of like badass, but it's generally a very lighthearted adventure, and that's because of that inspiration of things like Goemon. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that you mentioned the fact that Anthony has the opportunity to do some like writing for the game as well. I think it's really cool what is the flexibility that you have in these indie teams where there's crossover between the jobs you guys do, and it's very like fluid, and it's not so rigid and structured as you would have as a big game company. So I feel like you really get the I was reading a lot of articles because I was wondering just randomly what happens to the Halo series. And there was a whole write-up article about how basically the game became too big and they basically were too many people with too many different ideas about what the point or the purpose of the game was. And I feel like having these small teams where everyone gets to work and look at each other's things and make edits where they feel it feels natural and feels like it should happen, even though that's not technically their job or their position. The fact that that's possible, it makes it very clear for everyone what the direction of the game is and what this world is, without any of the messaging getting like diluted amongst tons of members with different jobs, different interests, and different purposes for being there. So I just think that's really interesting.
No, it's unique to Aquatic Moon. You're absolutely right that it's an essential ingredient, I think, for people to feel that they have agency and control over their creative contributions within reason, within confines. And so the way to do that is initially, so for example, if I were, let's say hypothetically speaking, that I were starting on a sequel to Twilight Monk, just purely hypothetically, what I would do is I would rough out the draft of everything I want to happen. And this is sort of like the rails of what I'm creating is, think about it like, and I've used this metaphor when explaining it to the team, but like, I imagine that I'm creating the zones for a farmland, and I'm saying, okay, so I'm going to have, this area gets more light, this area gets a little bit more water, this area over here has a little bit more moist soil. I've laid out the pathways throughout, and I've kind of allowed them, I've said, okay, you're in charge of this section over here. Now that doesn't mean that you can't go over and do some things in another section, but stick to the paths that were laid out, stick to the groundwork that was there. Don't go and, try to build another structure in there or change what the field is or change what we're even making. But as long as you're within the confines of that sort of field that I've planted the sort of the zones in, then you're free to create as long as it supports all of the pillars that have been already sort of set up. And in fact, there have been several instances where with people on my team where they were like, well, I didn't want to step on your toes. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I need you to take on that role because it's important for every person to have an expressive voice in the game's development. This game is the baby of 5 people in the sense that we're writing the script and like Amy, the animator, does a voice for a couple of monsters, and she's really everybody does a little bit of like, I got everybody to do a voice of either a monster or a NPC. And don't get me wrong, it's not a fully voiced game. It's just like an emote, like, you walk up to a shopkeeper and they go, hey, or something. And they're literally their voices in it, but it's their identity. It's their personality. And when I ask Amy to animate a monster, I might give her a suggestion, but I always give that the caveat of, hey, if you have an interesting way that you'd like to do this animation, please just go ahead and do it your way. And a good example of that is there's a moment in the very beginning of the game where Rin, he tells the player something, and right out of the gate, he runs off and sort of disappears to show the player where to go next. Well, his first run, I gave Amy keyframes, and I was just way too meticulous or micromanaging her. And then I kind of coaxed it out of her to find out that she wasn't really happy with the animation herself because she was feeling restricted by my keyframes. And I was like, well, tell me, what would you do? And she's like, oh, I'd have him do this like cool ninja run with his arms back like Naruto style. And I'm like, give me that. And in fact, whenever I give you a keyframe that isn't as cool as you can see it in your head, please do that, because I'm bogged down with making sure that the whole project is on schedule. I'm bogged down with looking at the game as a full big picture of a game. I'm worried about whether we can get that, chapter 3 sequence in with the boat or whatever, I'm worried about those factors. I can't worry also about, is my animator, I try to just make sure that I'm giving her enough information to do what she does best and then turn her loose. I don't want,
That's really funny.
I don't want automatons and I don't want AI. I want a person. The decision I made was when I hired that person, not in the day-to-day looking over their shoulder and saying, no, more like this or that.
I definitely noticed the personality there because I did notice the run that Rin does. And I thought it was funny because I was like, is this the Naruto run?
It's the Naruto run. Yeah. She's a Naruto fan too. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was really cool. But it's nice, those things, as you can see the personality of everyone going into the game.
Yeah.
And I really like that.
You were talking earlier about inspirations for the tone of the game as well. And I read through the entire One Piece manga during the development of this game. And it did dramatically affect like the sense of humor, the lightheartedness of all the characters. I'm a big fan of One Piece. It's the greatest comic ever made. Ever made. Yeah. Naruto's a close second.
Yeah, Naruto's a really, really good one. But I had assumed that you had read One Piece much before this, but it's interesting that you say that, you were reading it right at the same time. So it probably had a very like close impact in terms of, I feel like whatever you're reading and into at that exact time that you're working on the thing, that probably has the most close association.
Oh, yes.
And I can see it now, definitely, if you mention it. Even in like some of the facial expressions and stuff in the drawing style, like I can see that there's sort of some One Piece type of like moments.
Yes. Yeah.
It's really interesting.
One Piece is, it's incredible. It's just like, it's so freeing. And one of the things that I love about it is, I had been working on so many of these games where there's so many rules and restrictions on the style. And One Piece really just reminded me to have a freaking good time. Like, have a good time. And so I literally wrote a Post-it note over my desk that was like, have a good time. Every single day that you sit down to write a scene or a sequence, like, have a good time. Now, admittedly, One Piece has very sad moments too. And I will be the first to admit, there are to my knowledge, no real sad moments in the Twilight Monk game, even though the novels have a little bit of, pulls at your heartstrings a little bit at moments. But certainly the overall tone of the adventure, the sort of whimsical fantasy adventure of One Piece definitely bled through into Twilight Monk. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think we've been talking for a while, so I just want to wrap it up with one last question, I guess, just very generally.
Yeah.
What do you hope people will take away from, experiencing the story of this game? If it's someone, say, for example, who hasn't read any of the books and is just experiencing, they don't know who you are, and they're experiencing Twilight Monk for the very first time, what do you hope that individual person's takeaway from the experience is?
Mostly it's a good question. And when you're making a game, I think it's really important to think about what is the user experience like? What is the player going to feel? And honestly, I really just think that it would be great if people just had a good time. I don't want to make a game that it becomes anybody's obsession. I'm not trying to make a game that is anybody's, only game that they ever play. Although some people have said that's the only game they really want to play this year, and that's really cool to me. But at the same time, I really just want to give people something that brings them back to almost like a childlike feeling, the kind of games that they enjoyed growing up, or maybe something that they could share with their family. I made a game that, my mom could play, so to speak. I made a game that, whether you're 13 or whether you're 55, it'll take you back. If you're a little older, it'll take you back to the kind of way that people would play games, or the way games were made back in the 90s. It certainly has a lot of that nostalgic retro feel, and I'm very pleased with that. But ultimately, yeah, we're not trying to get too heavy with themes. We're not trying to preach at anybody. We're not trying to tell people the way they should think or feel. I think there's too much of that going on in the game industry. And so I wanted to give people something they can really just sink their teeth into for a solid weekend, or, if you don't have a lot of time for gaming, like maybe a week in the evenings. It's not a 400-hour game that's going to keep demanding that you get all really, into it. Although it's very engaging while you're playing it. And there is a lot of supplementary material if you get excited about the universe and the characters. And that's ultimately really what I would hope for. I couldn't really hope for more than that. Games should be entertaining and fun. And that's really important to me. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel that that people will respond well. I think that they'll feel that. I think that's interesting because I was not sure how you would respond to that, but I think that the feeling of being a child is really interesting. That you can feel just free, like you said. They can just have fun, like you said with the One Piece thing. They can jump into the game and feel like they're a kid, no matter what age they are, and just enjoy a good time, like a funny story, a good time, an adventure.
Yeah, there's a thing that Master Clue always says. He says "Gunga la Gunga," which means do you know what that part in the book? Have you read it? That part?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, he says "Gunga la Gunga," and Raz and Ran are like, "What does that even mean?" And he goes, "Yeah, man, it's like a chant, like, hey, just take it easy, man. Let the chips fall where they may. Have a good time, So yeah, Master Clue, he's kind of like a surfer. A real quick thing about Master Clue. In many ways, the Moonkin are just like Jedi, right? They just have like this sort of, they can use like a special kind of a power like the Force. And I always thought, what would make the funniest kind of Jedi master would be like an old surfer dude who's just on the beach chilling, every day, like, bro, man, you got to tap into the Force, man, like that kind of real laid back attitude. And I always thought that would make the best Jedi Master, and so that's what Master Clue is. And he's Raz's teacher, so yeah.
One of the people who had played the demo said, "I love Master Clue and his weed smoking personality."
Yes, he is that.
I thought that was really funny.
Yeah, he's a real laid back dude, man. He'd rather be surfing. That's him. And you know what? He's just it embodies what the monastery is, which is just kind of like they're a bit pacifist, and Raz is like he's got a bigger mission, man. He's got a calling. So that's where they will clash a little bit in time. But yeah. But hey, man, thank you for sitting down with me. I think we talked for about an hour here. So
yeah, I guess to wrap things up, Twilight Monk is coming out in March. The release month was released recently, so if you guys are interested, definitely check it out. Wishlist on Steam, all that will be coming to Steam and Switch in March 2025. And yeah, keep listening for the next podcast. We'll be discussing more stuff related to game dev, world building, all those things, just what went into creating the world of Twilight Monk.
Hey, Prince, is there a way that people can drop questions to us that we can talk about? Because maybe we could incorporate that into the podcast and actually answer some of their direct questions.
Yeah, for sure. I will make I think probably a Twitter post would be good for that.
Okay.
And maybe from there, where else would be good?
Well, I have a comment section. I post these podcasts also on my YouTube channel, so you could look up Twilight Monk Podcast and leave a comment there, and I can answer the ones that pop out that stand out.
Yeah. I think one of the best ways is if you made a YouTube video that was very short, just to advertise that we were taking Q&A for the next podcast. And if you tune into the next podcast, you can hear your questions answered. Because that's probably the most people who want questions answered. On Twitter, I think it might be a different kind of group of people. But I think on both platforms, we'll try and see what people say.
I do worry that I'm going to end up becoming just a podcaster, and then I don't get to work on games anymore.
Be careful. It's a slippery slope.
So that about wraps it up for this one. Thanks so much for listening. And of course, if you would like to see more of the art process or some director commentary, you can check out my YouTube channel over on YouTube, obviously. And if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe over there. Follow the podcast. And thanks so much for stopping by. We'll see you guys in the next one. All right, ciao.